Hello there. Welcome to the booth here at Pro Tour Kaladesh. Marshall Sutcliffe with Ian Duke. Hello, Ian. How have you been today?
I've been great.
Yeah,
fantastic matches so far.
We're working our way down pretty quickly, it must be said, through the quarters. But that brings us, of course, to our first semifinal match, where here we've got kind of the old vet at this point, Carlos Romao, already a world champion. He's been on the PT for a long time, having played 43 Pro Tours, versus Makis Matsoukas. This is his first Pro Tour. First time. So he's sitting down against somebody with a lot more experience. They're going to play a best of 5. Let's head down for our first semifinal match. Hello and welcome to coverage of Pro Tour Kaladesh. I'm Marshall Sutcliffe in the booth with Ian Duke from Wizards of the Coast R&D. I'm going to ask you some questions later on, by the way.
Sounds great.
Yeah, you better be ready to be quizzed, because
Always
we've got our semi-final number 1 lined up for you here. Let's take a look at this matchup. It is one of inexperience versus inexperience. It must be said, Makis Matsoukas from Greece, in his first Pro Tour. He's also the first seed coming in from our Swiss portion, and he is playing red-white tokens, a little bit of a different take on the red-white aggressive deck. We'll get into that as we work our way through the match. His opponent on the other side, though, no stranger to the Pro Tour here, Carlos Romao from Brazil. This is his 43rd Pro Tour. He's also a world champion in 2002, and I gotta say, he has had a heck of a week. It was just 7 days ago that he was winning, and he did win Grand Prix Atlanta as well. So he is on a real heater.
Absolutely. And both these players having a fantastic following from their home countries and their own Magic communities that are out there cheering them on right now. We say hello to you and thanks for joining us.
So let's see how things start off here for Makis Matsoukas, who is absolutely going to be the aggressor in this matchup. This is very much a traditional aggro versus control matchup. If you've watched a lot of high-level Magic, you'll be familiar with how these tend to play out. But of course, there's a lot of pieces that have to match up against each other. And how do you see that if you're sitting in, let's say, Carlos Romao's seat, dealing with the threats and the type of things that Makis is trying to present?
So I like to think of this matchup from the perspective of how is Makis' deck different from the traditional red-white vehicles decks that we've seen. And as Luis touched on earlier in the pre-game show here, Makis' deck, we're calling it red-white tokens. It's a little bit lower to the ground. It has more 1-drops. It's going a little bit wider, as we say, with more early creatures. And it's more all in on ending the game faster. So it is faster than the red-white vehicles deck. But in exchange for that, it's more susceptible to sweepers. And that's one of the key interactions there. We do see Radiant Flames from Carlos Romao coming out on turn 3. Just the perfect thing that Carlos wants to see starting off this game.
Yeah, and this is going to be, of course, the best out of 5. So we're going to see sideboard matches after the second game. But Carlos Romao actually has 3 copies of Radiant Flames in the main deck and has just resolved one, has an additional one in his hand.
And think about how important that was, because we do see Reckless Bushwhacker coming down the following turn. You know, if those tokens stayed on the battlefield and Makis was able to surge out the Reckless Bushwhacker this turn, that could have been a draw that put Carlos Romao, you know, down to, I don't know, 7 or 8 life by this point in the game already.
Wow. Yeah, that Radiant Flames was absolutely huge, and it's going to be one of the key cards to this matchup. If you want to keep an eye out for certain key cards and to see, you know, kind of hang on to, all right, if we see this card, we know that's a huge boon for the player casting it. That is the one for Carlos, as it's his cheapest sweeper, and it's very effective against small creatures, which is what Makis' deck is entirely based on. Another Servo Exhibition here for Makis. So he is reloading his board a little slowly. Does he have a follow-up? Nothing. So he's put out 4 power. It is something that Carlos is going to have to deal with, but he's going to fire off a Glimmer of Genius on Makis' end step here. And this is a really important card for his deck, as it lets him, A, find the answers that he needs. You know, the spot removal spells don't look quite as good against Makis, and of course he's got some slower cards in his deck as well that he'll want to get rid of. Lets him hit his land drops as well. And you can see that it's also an instant, which means that Torrential Gearhulk down the line can cast that from his graveyard.
Yeah, it's been a really important card here this weekend, and one of the most played cards in the top 8. And, you know, you were talking about quizzing me a little bit as an R&D member, and I can give you some insight on that card. We actually added this card during the process because our control decks were struggling a little bit, and there weren't many good things to flashback with Torrential Gearhulk. So we put this card in the set sort of designed to do this role. And, there was a little bit of uncertainty about how it would turn out, but we're really glad to see what it's been doing here this weekend, both in terms of enabling control and enabling energy decks as well.
Oh, that's great. It worked. He did it. Because here we go. We have, a deck that this is one of the key interactions in fact.
So I have to say things looking just great here for Carlos Romao. I mean, being able to cast that Glimmer of Genius on turn 4 without being under a tremendous amount of pressure, and then having a second copy of Radiant Flames just puts Carlos in a great spot here as we transition into the mid-game, still at a high life total, still with plenty of cards in hand.
Yeah, just a Smuggler's Copter here for Makis Matsoukas, and nothing to accrue it currently, though he can next turn, even if he doesn't add anything to the board because he has a Needle Spires, but...
And now, Marshall, let me highlight one of the things that's going on right now from Makis' standpoint here. If you take a look at his hand, he has 2 removal spells that are basically stranded in his hand as pretty much dead cards as far as the way this game is playing out. He's got Outnumber and Declaration in Stone, both cards that he's playing in 4 copies, and both cards that are, well, not truly completely dead against Carlos's deck. They're very huge liabilities, and that's part of the reason why, Makis has run out of gas here. So one option here for Makis is he might be able to activate a manland, the Needle Spires here. Instead, decides to go with Thraben Inspector, but either way, wants to get a creature onto the battlefield to crew that Smuggler's Copter, because getting a loot off that Smuggler's Copter would be so huge for him here. It's almost like being up a card in the sense that he gets to throw away one of those dead removal spells and replace it with something new from the top of his deck. Now, Carlos Romao, unlikely to let that happen uncontested, because I do see a copy of Harnessed Lightning over here in Romao's hand, and I believe if that Smuggler's Copter is crewed, that we'll see that Harnessed Lightning take it out before it's able to attack.
Which is certainly important here, given that Makis has, like you said, effectively dead cards in his hand that he's just dying to get rid of. And there it is, Harnessed Lightning to shoot down the Copter. And still nothing going for Makis.
And even if there were, look at how Carlos Romao sort of has his bases covered here. He actually even had Summary Dismissal up that previous turn if Makis had a powerful play. Also has Radiant Flames waiting in the wings there in case, Makis explodes with something like a Servo Exhibition or some other way to develop a lot of threats on the board. Now on top of that, Carlos passing the turn back with 6 untapped lands and Torrential Gearhulk, representing a removal spell flashback from the graveyard, or if there's nothing threatening, getting that Glimmer of Genius back again.
In the meantime, all Makis has left to do here is just animate his Needle Spires and get into the red zone, but this isn't going to turn out very well for him, as he outnumbers, not even close to big enough to take down this Gearhulk, at least as it sits now. Does get a little interesting given the double strike. He actually can leverage it.
That's right. If Carlos were to, say, go for a Glimmer of Genius here and then try to block the Needle Spires, Makis would be able to play Outnumber and trade both the Needle Spires and the Outnumber for the Gearhulk. So Carlos just deciding here, does he want to go for the pure card advantage or play it safe with a removal spell? Looks like he's decided on the Glimmer of Genius.
So he's going to put the Glimmer in play here, and Scry 2. He sees another copy of it. And was that another Gearhulk underneath, too? Couldn't quite see, but...
It looks like it is, yeah. So this is going to make, Carlos feel a lot better about potentially having to trade off the Gearhulk here. He doesn't know that yet, but that's the way things are looking like they might play out this turn.
Yeah, he went top with those, so that means he's just going to draw those 2 cards. He likes what he sees. And I guess look at this. He sees that this is a possibility with the Outnumber, and he's going to be a little conservative. Carlos figures, look, I've got some life total to give. He knows how close he is to having just complete control of this game, and he's going to give up 4 life in order to keep his Torrential Gearhulk online.
That's such a clever block there. I mean, that really shows Carlos was thinking exactly about Outnumber, and it's, if you think about how the game is played out, Carlos has seen a couple turns go by where Makis had 2 cards in his hand, didn't cast anything. Of course, these players know each other's decks lists by now, so Carlos must have reasoned that, Makis has some combination of Outnumber Declaration in Stone or possibly more lands in his hand, and just went ahead and played around that outnumber. Now, the thing that's also great about that is by taking out the Thraben Inspector and not the creature land, that forces Makis to tap even more mana the next time he wants to use the creature land, which makes it awkward to do things like crew vehicles and develop his board while continuing to put pressure on.
With a pair of Torrential Gearhulk in hand for Carlos Romao, along with, well, a lot more. Let's take a look at what he has going on. You can see he has a Summary Dismissal, which isn't the type of card you generally want against a deck for Makis, but it's fine. And then he's got another Glimmer and even a Radiant Flames, just in case Makis chains together a couple of token makers and creates a reasonable board. Carlos is just going to go ahead and let his Torrential Gearhulk get Declaration in Stone. Hey, it's just another card for him anyway. But here's a Reckless Bushwhacker now. And it is going to be paid for with Surge. 4 blockers. Another Gearhulk. Makis just has to say, yeah, okay. Now Carlos is going to use a Harness Lightning here.
So I don't have an artifact.
Oh, so it's 2/2 and 2/1.
Yes.
You know, just clarifying that. And Makis notes the Apprentice is actually at normal size. He doesn't control an artifact currently.
1 energy. 1 block here.
Pretty brutal there from Carlos Romao. We've known that he's been significantly ahead ever since that early game sweeper that he got to play there. Makis has never really been back in this game.
That's right. We talked about the differences between Makis' red-white tokens deck and a more traditional red-white vehicles deck, in that the red-white tokens deck is a little bit faster, but it is more lacking in late game. And yeah, you know, Carlos Romao plays that second Torrential Gearhulk, and that's enough to wrap things up here.
Yeah, that was savage. And you could see it from Makis. He's, you know, fighting the good fight, but come on, they play the third Torrential Gearhulk on you. What are you supposed to do? And he just picked up his permanents. He had seen enough there. All right, well, we've got more semifinal action lined up for you. We'll be back right after these messages.
Test drive the top standard decks from this Pro Tour in the Pro Tour Gauntlet beginning this Wednesday on Magic Online. For more information, visit mtgo.com.
Ready to take your game to the next level and start on the path to the Pro Tour? Rise to the challenge and test your skills at a local preliminary Pro Tour qualifier. To find an event near you, visit magic.wizards.com/pptq.
And welcome back to the feature match area here in beautiful Hawaii. I'm Marshall Sutcliffe in the booth with Ian Duke, bringing you coverage of Pro Tour Kaladesh. We're in the semifinal. We're in the first one. We've got another one lined up for you after this. That, of course, will determine our finalists, and then we will be bringing you coverage of the finals. We wouldn't leave you all alone. There's the trophy that the player gets. You can see that top half is kind of the one that they get to take home, but they also get their name added to the bottom, which has the names of every Pro Tour champion and a little plaque on it.
Yeah, it really speaks to the long and storied history of competitive Magic play.
Totally. When I first saw the Gearhulks, I was like, whoa, these are bombs, right? Because I'm thinking, you know, for the podcast and for Limited and stuff like that. And it turns out they are. But my favorite one in Limited is the black one, the Noxious Gearhulk. But I think I have a different favorite one for Constructed. It's definitely Torrential Gearhulk, which we've seen on display here this weekend. This thing's great.
Yeah, this was, you know, when we looked at the Gearhulks, we were trying to make a cycle of really powerful creatures with kind of big splashy enter the battlefield effects, similar in spirit to like the Titans or the Souls or the Praetors, a couple of other big creature cycles we've done in the past. What we wanted to do with the Gearhulks is make them feel a little bit different from each other. So they actually each have a wide variety of different effects. And what we were going for with Torrential Gearhulk was trying to create a finisher for a control deck. So what it does is it allows you to flashback. You know, we say flashback, meaning casting a spell from your graveyard again. You can either flashback a draw spell, get some more advantage, or reuse a counter spell, you know, once you sort of have the game locked up and you're in a defensive position to just close things out.
Yeah, you know what I really like about it too is that sometimes the win conditions in a control deck happen, but then and effectively seal up the victory, but it can take turn after turn after turn after turn to actually win. Torrential Gearhulk kind of gets in there. You know, it just pounds in for 5 damage a turn. It's got 6 toughness. It's very tough to kill for a lot of different types of removal spells. And it actually tends to clean up the game very quickly, which I think is a benefit. Like, I think that, you know, when you're sitting down to play either with or against a control player, you know, there's a lot of fighting that happens in the early to mid part of the game. But usually the way things play out is that once they kind of turn that corner and they've drawn a bunch of extra cards and they've got backup counter spells, you know, the game, it feels like it might be kind of over. But like I said, it can take a while. But man, this Gearhulk just like cleans up on the ground, and I kind of like that.
Yeah, it's true. We often like to give creatures that we situate as control finishers a little bit higher power so that they can actually close out the games quickly, because one of the most frustrating things is when you start to lose to a control deck, but you just have to play it out because there's that, you know, 5% chance you might be able to squeak out a victory.
Yeah.
It's more fun when things, you know, when things are ready to end, they just kind of close out in 4 turns or so.
Yeah. It's also nice for us control players to get to turn something sideways a few times.
Oh,
you know,
yeah.
get in the red zone. Looks like our players are just about ready. They're examining hands and resolving mulligans. All right, sounds like they're ready. Let's head down for game number 2. Carlos won the first game. That means that Makis will once again be on the play. I will remind our viewers at home that this is still a pre-sideboarded game. We will be consulting sideboards after this game.
So we're receiving word that Carlos Romao has mulligan to 6,
Okay.
but I'm taking a look at both players' hands here, Marshall. We'll have those up for you in just a moment. They're both looking like pretty decent hands here. Makis Matsoukas leading off with a Thraben Inspector into Smuggler's Copter. Saw a second copy of Thraben Inspector in his hand as well. So he's pretty in on making sure this Smuggler's Copter can connect. Wants to get value from the loot, and that's his main source of damage right now. We'll see if Carlos Romao has an answer for it.
Confirmed. Harness Lightning seems to be the answer of choice at this Pro Tour. You know, new card from Kaladesh, taking down another new card from Kaladesh, and Harness Lightning doing a very good job of trashing those copters, but and often before they even get the loot train rolling also.
So a nice back and forth sequence from both players here. Good news for Greece at home for those fans watching is that there's a second copy of Smuggler's Copter here for Makis Matsoukas.
Well,
But
for
the
Brazil
Brazilian
also
side,
having something to cheer about.
a
don't
second
they?
copy of Harness Lightning. So these players really trading back and forth, and I have to imagine that that's going to favor Carlos Romao, just wanting to make those early game 1-for-1 trades, and doesn't mind getting hit for 1 or 2 damage at a time in these early turns if that means he can continue to make his land drops and advance toward a later game.
Yeah, the board state from Makis not super impressive, but now it is. You know, the Inventor's Apprentice adding another couple of power to the battlefield means that for a turn is something that Carlos is going to have to contend with, even though the 2 Smuggler's Copters were shot down.
Red, white, blue.
And we hear Carlos counting colors of mana there is a
We know
bad
what that
sign.
means. Terrible news for Makis Matsoukas. That's the first Radiant Flames. Remember, Carlos has 3 of those in his main deck. And you expect to see one of those.
Yeah, Radiant Flames and later on actually Fumigate being the key cards here for Carlos Romao. You know, if we were looking at this matchup, except it were Shota Yasuoka or Pierre Dalgen on the other side, I think those decks would be in a lot less of a good situation against Makis Matsoukas, just because they don't have sweepers where Carlos Romao does. And I think that's one of his main advantages here in this top 8, where there are 3 red-white aggressive decks.
That's right. Yeah, the 2 Fumigate joining the 3 Radiant Flames that we just mentioned a moment ago. Carlos is at the requisite 6 mana for a Gearhulk here. Has just passed the turn back. He's got a Dovin Bond in his hand. Let's see what else he's working with. Well, there's that Gearhulk.
Sure enough.
A pair of Glimmer of Genius gives him something to do if he decides not to cast the Gearhulk this turn as well. Makis is going to go for the Needle Spire's activation and attack with it. And it's just too much value here for Carlos Romao. He's just going to play the Gearhulk out there, get the thumbs up from Makis. He's going to, we say flashback for short. Though technically, I guess that's not what's happening here with the Gearhulk. But yeah, he gets to replay Glimmer of Genius from his graveyard for free. Oh, this is scries a land to the bottom and another Gear Hulk to the top. This could be another quick one. He's going to gobble up the Needle Spires, and it looks like he even gets to keep his Gear Hulk this time as well. Yeah, pass the turn back from Makis, and this one's going right according to plan if you're sitting in Carlos Romao seat, just like game one.
That's right. And despite Carlos being at 9 life, you know, again, not everything about Magic in terms of who's winning and who's losing is about life totals. And Carlos's deck is situated to actually take some early damage, go a little bit low on life, and then seize control of the game in the mid and long game. And that's exactly what he is doing right here.
Meanwhile, Makis is going to once again activate a Needle Spires, and he is not going to like the way that this one turns out, because Carlos is actually just going to run out a second Gear Hulk, and he's got a Harness Lightning in his graveyard that he can use to just kill the Needle Spires. He doesn't even need to risk his Gear Hulk in combat this time. Even profits a couple of energy on the transaction, and all of a sudden, Carlos is sitting there with 10 power of Gear Hulks ready to just start crunching in on Makis' life total, and this is going to be over in just a few turns.
Yeah, I agree. We noted that copy of Dovin Bond in Carlos's hand, so he has the option to just attack for 10 here, post-combat, play Dovin Bond, use the +1 on Toolcraft Exemplar, and he really, you know, isn't facing down much of any threat there. Decides to take a slightly more conservative route.
Makes sense, right? He still has the same clock. He can either attack with both this turn and then get either one in next turn, or one this turn and get both of them in next turn. Either way, it's going to be 15 damage. He's also left up Anticipate and a pair of Glimmer of Genius.
So here's quite a development. There is a declaration in stone on Torrential Gearhulk.
No.
This would take out both of those creatures.
Interesting. And, you know, currently Carlos does not have a way to interact here. So let's see what his plan is. It looks like maybe he's going to line up a Glimmer of Genius to start things off. You got to figure if he can find a counterspell of some sort here that he's pretty much locked this one up.
Looks like a Fumigate and a land, yeah. Probably doesn't want either of those. Might keep the Fumigate.
He does. You know, that makes a lot of sense, right? He's hedging. He says, okay, well, if I don't see a counterspell here, I'm losing my board state. And, you know, Makis could easily play another creature or a couple of tokens or something like that, in which case a Fumigate would be pretty nice to have. So this is a big turn, though, for Makis, because, you know, he was looking like he might be dead next turn. And all of a sudden, that isn't the case anymore.
Okay.
Well, but wait, there's more. Here is a Reckless Bushwhacker as well. You can see what that does. It is surged out here, by the way.
And I believe that's actually 9 damage represented here. So Carlos is going to have to maybe try to anticipate into a removal spell.
Holy smokes, what a swing for Makis Matsoukas. Here's the Anticipate.
And it's all right here. Is that a Harness Lightning?
It is.
Wow. This is about as close as it gets,
It's
Marshall.
actually 3 removal spells that he found.
Oh, wow. When it rains, it pours, huh?
No kidding, even when those Gear Hulks are exiled. So he went for Immolating Glare here, and that's going to take down the 3-powered attacker. Whew, that was close. Remember,
It sure was.
I mean, this is the same turn that Carlos is like, I'll keep a Fumigate just in case, right off of one of his Glimmers, and next thing you know, he's facing lethal.
Yeah, that Reckless Bushwhacker, really surprising just in terms of the damage output it can bring out of nowhere. And that was really wise that Carlos held on to that Fumigate. I think a lot of players, you know, might have bottomed it there just looking for a removal spell or a counter spell. I guess a counter spell in that situation is what he was digging for. But good thing he held on to it. So this turn...
Well, now it looks pretty good, yeah.
Yeah.
If he didn't hit a spot removal spell with that Anticipate, you might have been singing a different tune.
Sure. Yeah, that's true.
Die with it in his hand. Oh, he's going to breathe a sigh of relief that he hit off that Anticipate, though, because he was so close to just taking this game, and all of a sudden, tables got turned on him.
So this turned a little bit awkward for Carlos Romao. He wants to fire off the Fumigate, just gain a couple life, get rid of those creatures, but he also has some 4-drops that he wants to play here too. I mean, he'd love to be able to go, say, Fumigate plus Dovin Bond and gain 2 more life and draw a card from Dovin Bond, but only has 8 mana. Also has Glimmer of Genius in his hand as an option. We could see him actually just play the Dovin Bond, not play the Fumigate. shrink down one of those creatures, invite Makis to play out a couple more creatures or whatever he
Interesting.
draws, and save the Fumigate for the following turn.
Yeah, we know that Carlos has a lot to do with his mana here with those 2 clues on the battlefield. And, he's got another Glimmer of Genius in his hand at the very least.
He also has Summary Dismissal in hand, which makes this play a lot safer, because if there is, some kind of confluence of events or cards that Makis draws, he can always just decide to play that counterspell.
That's
For,
I like this from Carlos. He's playing with fire, right? He's taking a little tiny bit of damage here, but he properly sees that Makis is going to need to put a little bit more on the board to actually get Carlos dead here. And with Carlos with an active Planeswalker and a Glimmer of Genius in play, he is likely to find a lot of ways to interact. And wow, he just drew both of those cards, Ian. Not good news for Makis once again, though. We've seen him nearly steal a game.
So interesting note last turn, Makis could have played Reckless Bushwhacker from his hand, declined to. I think he's thinking about Fumigate or Radiant Flames, doesn't want to play into a sweeper, and it wouldn't have been lethal damage, so, doesn't see a lot of value there in getting the extra damage. Also, by saving the Reckless Bushwhacker, if he top decks into another creature, he can play that creature, then the Bushwhacker in one turn, and get in a bunch of surprise damage. That said, that gave Carlos the window to resolve that Glimmer of Genius in safety, and, that gives Carlos more options, more cards going forward. So here is Fumigate from Carlos Romao. In response, Makis Matsoukas plays Outnumber on his own creature. That reduces the creature count in play by 1, so Carlos gains 1 fewer life from the Fumigate. I think only gained 1 life there from the Fumigate. Could be wrong.
There's an Ether Hub and nothing. Makis very smartly keeping that Reckless Bushwhacker in hand here, as he knows that some of the most explosive turns that he can put together are by playing a Token Maker and then playing a Reckless Bushwhacker so that he can have the Surge cost, give everything haste, and his other creatures +1/+0 and jam for, well, maybe even lethal, it depends. This one is slowly slipping away from him once again, though. It's been a very back and forth game where Carlos looked to be fully in the driver's seat. Then a big attack from Makis, though it was mostly thwarted. And now Makis is trying to summon just that last 7 points of damage. But Dovinbon is conspiring against him. Glimmer of Genius, same thing.
But remember, earlier in this game, we were almost ready to count Makis out of the game. And then the following turn, that huge play with the Bushwhacker brought things to a game state where Carlos needed to anticipate into exactly a 2-mana removal spell just to survive. He would have actually lost that turn. So things got super close there, and I wouldn't count this deck out just yet.
What do we have here? Maybe Pianolar? He's just going to play the Bushwhacker. And he's going to attack Dovinbon, but wow, Carlos Romao has Archangel Avacyn.
And this turn, a real sign of weakness and desperation, I think, from Makis here, in that he was holding onto that Bushwhacker for quite some turns, trying to set up a big combination of, drawing into a creature and giving it haste in the same turn. Playing it there and attacking the Dovinbon indicates that he's sort of given up on Carlos's life total and just needs to hope that Carlos has nothing and he can kill the Dovinbon and then take things from there. But Carlos, with so many cards in hand...
This is what nothing looks like if you look on the right-hand side of the screen. Right. Not an amazing hand for Romao, but he doesn't really need one here. He's got a counterspell in his hand plus a Quarantine Field, as well as Archangel Avacyn and an active Planeswalker on the battlefield. He just has a lot going on.
But here's another piece of insight into how Makis was constructing this turn. We saw him cast the Reckless Bushwhacker, then post-combat try to play the Gideon, but unfortunately that is not enough. And Carlos Romao is going to take this game 2, going up to a 2-0 lead.
That's right. Romao had Summary Dismissal for Gideon, and that'll do it. So Carlos Romao off to a relatively quick 2-0 lead over Makis Matsoukas here. And Carlos has just been running the tables here. He is putting himself in a very good spot. Now, we are going to sideboards here. So let's take a look at what the sideboards look like from each of the players. We'll start with Makis Matsoukas and see what he's got in the board. He's got another couple of Gideon's Lantern Scouts. There's Thalia's Fragmentize pair of Harness Lightning, pair of Make a Stand. Might want to see that one. A couple of Stasis Snares and an additional Needle Spires. Anything jump out to you, Ian?
So the Gideons I love for sure. Classic thing here is when you're playing an aggro deck, you're up against a control, you bring in some Planeswalkers just to diversify your threats. And if you can stick a Planeswalker, it's really hard for your opponent to spend the time to have to remove it. Make a Stand is also a card that I can definitely see coming in here. In fact, I think we will see it here. It gives your creatures indestructible until end of turn. Works great against sweepers like Radiant Flames, like Fumigate. Can also get in a couple extra damage in a pinch here, giving your creatures +1/+0 as well. We might see the Needle Spires come in since the game might go a little bit longer. Makis might want more things to do with his mana in the later game, so just an extra creature land there to activate. And then the fourth card that I see that I think is relevant here is Thalia, Heretic Cathar.
Okay.
Now, part of the power of this card is in tapping creatures that enter the battlefield under your opponent's control. Carlos Romao doesn't have a lot of creatures, but one of the ones that he does, or actually both of the ones that he does, are flash creatures that come into play and try to surprise block. So if those are entering tapped, they can't actually block that turn. But the more relevant part of Thalia is that Carlos is playing a 3-color deck with lots of non-basic lands, and playing Thalia is essentially like playing an Avalanche Riders in a way, which is a creature that enters a battlefield and destroys one of your opponent's lands because it's going to put Carlos -1 on mana each turn thereafter, as well as adding some pressure to the board.
Yeah, I like Thalia Heretic Cathar in this position, definitely. The first strike seems less relevant than it normally would be. Sometimes she'll tussle with other creatures, but not so much here. Okay, let's take a look at what Carlos has on his side of the equation here. Well, he's got Gideons of his own. Also one Linvala the Preserver, triple Spell Queller. And again, you mentioned the Gearhulks and the Avacins, but there's also Spell Quellers that could potentially come in out of the sideboard here as early interaction with creatures and spells. A Blessed Alliance, 3 Ceremonious Rejection. Not much for him. He's not going to be countering like Smuggler's Copters, is he?
No, it's not worth bringing in Ceremonious Rejection when your opponent's only artifacts are Smuggler's Copters.
Yeah. And then a Fumigate. That's 1 extra sweeper that would put him up to a full 6, and then triple negate if he wants those.
That's right. I think the Fumigate is a slam dunk here. Extra sweepers against a tokens deck just makes sense. Pretty straightforward. Linvala, I think, will also come in, the life gain being really relevant there. And also, very likely that you'll get the extra creature because your opponent, again, is playing a tokens deck. They're going to have lots of creatures. Blessed Alliance, I could see it coming in or not. I mean, it asks your opponent to sacrifice a creature, which is less effective against tokens. That said, it is a very effective answer to Smuggler's Copter, although they still get the loot because they were able to attack first. And then, so I can see that going either way. Spell Queller is also an option. I suspect they probably won't come in, but they're good at stopping small spells, and they are a flash blocker that can take out some tokens as well. But I think we'll definitely see the Fumigate and the Linvala, and then from there, it's kind of up to personal preference.
Cards in the main deck that look like they may not want to be in there. He's got a Quarantine Field, which seems a little slow against a tokens deck. We mentioned that he's already got the sweepers. He's got a 1 of Stasis Snare, the Immolating Glare. Maybe, I don't know. Again, I think of spot removal as being not so good against these token decks.
Yeah, the cards I think are more likely to come out actually are the counter spells, just because you don't want to end up in a situation where you're behind on board and then you're trying to sit back on counter spells and hope your opponent gives you a favorable time to cast them. Just not where you want to be. In particular with Summary Dismissal, a 4-mana counter spell is just really inefficient when most of your opponent's cards cost only 1 or 2 mana.
And he has 5 counter. He's got 3 Void Shatters and 2 Summary Dismissals, so he can pull those out. Bring in some of this good stuff here.
Yeah, I think given that 5 cards are coming out, it's probably likely that we'll see the Linvala, the Fumigate, and then either the 3 Spell Quellers or 2 Spell Quellers and 1 Blessed Alliance.
Okay. Well, we could play up to 3 sideboarded games. If Carlos has it his way, we'll play 1. But Makis does get to bring in some potent threats and sort of mix up what he's throwing at Carlos Romao and make him have the right answers for the right things at the right time. And if he doesn't, then Makis gets to run him over. So
the 2 keys here for Makis is that, A, he gets to be on the play. So regardless of whether we're pre or post sideboard, that's a big advantage given the speed of his deck. And then the other big thing is, one way I could see Makis stealing a game here is with Make a Stand in response to a sweeper. If Carlos taps out for a Radiant Flames or a Fumigate and Makis was able to get ahead on board and leave up 3 mana for Make a Stand, the game is just almost over on the spot. Now, the flip side of that is it can be a little bit hard to arrange and hard to leave the mana up, and there are only 2 copies of Make a Stand, but it is a way we might see this game conclude.
All right, well, we are underway here in game number 3 of our first semifinal match. Carlos Romao from Brazil finds himself up 2-0 over relative newcomer Makis Matsoukas in his first Pro Tour. Carlos on a real heater, having won a Grand Prix last weekend in Atlanta, hopped on a plane, came over here to Hawaii, and now he's in the semifinals and up 2 games against Makis Matsoukas. So let's see how this one pans out. We see a turn 3 Pia Nalar creating a Thopter, which is then going to allow the Toolcraft Exemplar to bash for 3. No plays yet from Romao, though seem to be thinking here.
Let's take a look at Carlos Romao's hand here. Looking not spectacular to me. There is a spell queller that he has access to this turn, but he is behind on board. And again, counterspell-like effects, not exactly where you want to be when you're behind on board.
Yeah,
I imagine.
Run it out, right?
Yeah, he'll probably run it out during combat and just try to block, I think.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking too. He's just using it as an ambush viper, as it were. And this is before blockers. So this is actually an interesting spot because Makis Matsoukas really does want to get rid of this spell queller, else it's going to gobble up Pia Nalar here, or a Thopter. I don't think Carlos would want to trade off for the Toolcraft Exemplar, but it's also possible.
Yeah, I imagine if Carlos is allowed to block, that spell queller is getting in front of Pia Nalar right here. Now, Makis on board has an option to sacrifice the Thopter and force the spell queller to not be able to block, but looks like he actually had Stasis Snare in hand as well. And that'll just take out the spell queller before blocks and ensure that he gets in for 6 damage that turn, dropping Carlos to 11.
I like that play for Makis. This is exactly what needs to happen. There needs to be a punch counter punch about 2 times if Makis has a decent board, which is exactly what he has here. And Carlos could find himself dead very, very quickly without any answers.
So Carlos here, I think we're going to see Dovin Bond
Yes.
come down this turn, +1 on the Toolcraft Exemplar. And that'll leave 3 power on board from the Thopter and Pia Nalar. Now, Pia has the ability to pump up that Thopter for 1 in a red, and that will allow Makis, if he chooses, to attack for 4 damage and take out Dovin Bond. But in the process there, Carlos has, in a way, sort of gained 7 life. He's reduced 3 damage from the Toolcraft Exemplar and sunk 4 damage into the Dovin Bond. So that could end up working out decently for him if he's able to, say, play a Fumigate next turn or something along those lines.
And yeah, he's going to make that play that you described there, Ian, pumping up the token, taking down Dovin Bond. Though this does mean that Carlos takes no damage this turn, and with that Fumigate in hand, sorry, it looks like he actually has 2 copies of Archangel Avacyn in his hand that he's trying to set up.
And there's a Servo
Wow.
Exhibition adding 2 more artifacts for Makis Matsoukas. And Carlos Romao would really love to see a sweeper this turn. We'll see what he picked up.
Fumigate's what he wants, but he doesn't have it.
Instead, opting to pass the turn. Looks like we'll see Archangel Avacyn coming down.
Yeah. Which isn't bad, but, this go-wide strategy for Makis really does make any individual blocker not as important. And another thing to keep in mind is a play that you described a couple of turns ago that Makis didn't end up making but still has access to, which is you can use Pia Nalar's other ability to sacrifice an artifact and make a creature unable to block until end of turn. And that might actually be what Makis is trying to set up here because, a clue you can sack, though it looks like he immediately does so. I think he was trying to hit a bushwhacker there.
Ah, that makes sense.
Yeah, but he did not hit, so he's just going to go to combat and attack with everything. And here's Archangel Avacyn. And immediately, one of those servos is going to get picked up by Pia Nalar, chucked at Archangel Avacyn to distract her for a little while. And then...
You've come around to my interpretation of what's happening there.
I love it. Carlos is going to drop down to 4 here, way behind now.
And I think this is the turn where Carlos would need to draw Fumigate.
He's going to start off by attacking for 4. Does he have anything he can do?
He's taking a look at his hand here. Looks like he's picked up a Gideon ally of Zendikar since last we saw. That's, okay, can add a blocker here, but I don't think that's going to be enough to really help him out. Quarantine Field, again, too expensive, as you mentioned, and a second copy of Avacyn can only really replace the first. I don't see what Carlos Romao can really do with the tools that he has here at his disposal.
Now, on top of all that, Makis Matsoukas has a Needle Spires hiding down there in his mana base, too, which is another lethal threat. And that's going to do it. Makis Matsoukas steals a game back from Carlos Romao to make it 2-1. And so far, Makis is 1 for 1 on post-sideboard games. Really good start for him, and that is how he draws it up, right? I mean, that's the thing where it wasn't like Carlos was stumbling on mana. I mean, he played a Planeswalker into Archangel Avacyn, but, Matsoukas just had the answer to keep it at bay both times, and very effective at doing so.
That's right. I mean, in those first 2 games, this matchup looked pretty heavily favored toward Carlos Romao, and I think a big part of that was he had Radiant Flames on turn 3 both times. In the game we just saw, Carlos Romao didn't see any of his sweepers. I think he has 3 times Radiant Flames and 3 times Fumigate post-sideboard. Didn't come up with any of those 6, and his deck just, especially being on the draw that game, was just looking like it was a little too sluggish to keep up. I
think you summed that one up nicely, Ian. We saw Radiant Flames on turn 3 in some of these games, and in the one we didn't, Carlos got ran over. So, again, we'll be keeping an eye on that as you move forward. If you haven't seen a lot of this matchup, that is one of the key cards is Radiant Flames for Carlos. On the other side, by the way, if you want to keep an eye on a certain card or a certain interaction from Makis, it's going to be Reckless Bushwhacker, right? That's the kind of card that he can play to just completely dominate a board that looked maybe a little benign and crunch in for so much damage that it can make Carlos difficult to come back. Now, the key card, I'd have to say the key card from that last match was Pia Nalaar. Pia Nalaar, enabled not only having an artifact so that Toolcraft Exemplar was attacking, not only an attacking flyer and 3 power, for 1 card, also the ability to pump it, which took down Dovinbon, also the ability for her to start throwing junk, at the opponent's blockers. All of those things happened in that last game. And really, I think Makis was able to use Pia Nalaar to win that game.
Yeah, Pia Nalaar has done a ton of work this weekend. This is actually one of my favorite new cards from Kaladesh here. It just does so much. It's a great creature, adds some good board presence to a red deck, and also has a lot of great utility. And when we were thinking about this card, Marshall, you can see the 3rd bullet point there that R&D wanted to pay homage to Pia and Kira Nalaar from Magic Origins. That's absolutely true. We wanted to call back to the tremendously popular card Pia and Kira Nalaar. So Pia, of course, makes Thopters, calling back to that card in a way. But we wanted to make sure that the card wasn't too sort of derivative of the original version. So we wanted to give her some special abilities that tie into playing with artifacts and can give you some utility in an aggressive artifact deck there. So you can see that fire-breathing-esque ability there where you're giving your creatures +1/+0 if they're artifact creatures and sacrificing an artifact to make a creature not block this turn, which we've decided we're interpreting as her, summoning a Thopter to kind of buzz around the opposing creature's head and distract it while your other creatures sneak by.
Mine's better. It doesn't come back. All right, let's head back down. The players are ready. They are all shuffled up and ready to go for Game 4 here on our first semifinal match. I'll remind you that we've got semifinal 2 coming up next. That's Shoti Asaoka versus Ben Hull. We'll, of course, get you fully prepped and up to speed on that one when it's time to go. But Red-White Tokens versus Jeskai Control, game number 4 here. And for the first time, Carlos Romao gets to be on the play in this match. Makis Matsoukas, Adventurer's Apprentice to start things off. Pretty innocuous at this point in the game, but likely to be attacking for 2 next turn.
So one interesting thing is that Makis actually led off with an Ether Hub and spent his energy right away to play that Inventor's Apprentice. I wonder if that means he'll be choked on red mana potentially as the game goes on a bit.
Definitely possible. A Smuggler's Copter is a follow-up play. He's going to play that first main phase so that his Inventor's Apprentice will get in for 2 damage rather than 1. But Carlos does have a play on end step. It's going to be an Anticipate.
So while Carlos decides to Anticipate, we'll take a brief look here at Makis Matsoukas' hand. Looks like indeed he is a little bit short on land and no more red mana until he can find either an energy source or another land.
Land number 3 for Carlos Romao. And he just quietly passes the turn back with a Spell Queller in hand.
And we'll take a look at what Makis has drawn here. Looks like a copy of PNLR doesn't help him out here. I think all we're going to see adding to the board is a servo exhibition and then probably crewing up that smuggler's copter. Now, Makis really wants to be able to loot with this smuggler's copter, so hopefully for him, he'll actually be able to commit it as an attacker before it gets destroyed by something like a harnessed lightning.
He will. In fact, it's going to be immolating glare. If we take a look at Romao's hand here. Huh.
So it's just that Inventor's Apprentice coming in. So Makis might be thinking about not wanting to give Carlos Romao the opportunity to spend mana to take out the Smuggler's Copter, instead kind of keeping that vehicle, safe and sound. One of the things about vehicles is, they're difficult to interact with as long as they remain non-creatures. And so Makis might be saying, hey, you left mana up to planning to answer my Smuggler's Copter? I'm not going to let you do that. So,
well, Carlos is going to change gears a little bit here and just play Spell Queller and block, which doesn't eat up the Inventor's Apprentice. They just bounce off of each other. Land number 4 for Carlos Romao as we see Makis Matsoukas fall a little further and a little further behind on mana, though his deck is significantly less mana hungry than his opponent's.
So Carlos Romao also needing to spend energy from his Ether Hub there. So even though we did see a copy of Gideon Ally of Zendikar in Carlos's hand, he doesn't have double white to cast it. So wasn't necessarily by choice that Carlos passed the turn without playing Gideon.
Yeah, sure.
This time, Smuggler's Copter gets crewed, gets into the red zone, gets a loot off. That's going to be really important for Makis in terms of,
Yeah, especially considering that
more
he
cards.
missed yet again, Ian. So, it's tempting to think, oh, well, you missed, so it didn't matter. But this, of course, is digging him one card deeper to finding the lands that he needs to keep going. He's got his 3rd mana this turn, but he's got a lot of cards in hand. He's got 5 spells in his hand right now, and he really wants to be able to deploy those. Let's see what he's got. Does he have Make a Stand here? He does. Carlos says, which one is that? Creatures you control get +1/+0 and gain indestructible. Works beautifully in this deck as you can use it reactively to keep your creatures from dying. You can also use it proactively to pile on a ton of damage.
And that's sort of the maximum value there, being able to use it during your attack, even while your vehicle is crewed already. I think mostly it's there to stop things like Radiant Flames and maybe Fumigate, but fantastic use there against the Immolating Glare. Here's an end of turn Anticipate from Carlos Romao.
We see a Radiant Flames in his hand. He's had that for a little while.
And this is a tough situation for Carlos. I think his plan here was to use Immolating Glare to take out the Copter, and then he'd have a Radiant Flames to sweep away all the real creatures, as it were.
Yep.
But now, even if he casts Radiant Flames this turn, that Copter is still lurking there, and Makis is sure to follow up with another creature, given that he has missed a land drop so far this game and has a handful of cards. So Carlos, correctly sniffs that out and doesn't go with the Radiant Flames here.
Yeah.
Instead, leaves up a Harnessed Lightning, again, trying to get that Smuggler's Copter well the window where its creature is open.
Yeah, he's basically repeating the same line that he took last turn, just with a slightly different card. But he can't be happy about it because when this happens, he is taking some damage, depending on what Makis has. He could take some damage, I should say. And also, Makis is getting that loot. So even if he finally does trade 1-for-1 with the Copter, that would be the 2nd time that Makis Matsoukas has been able to loot. And
Well,
that's
this
a
time, unlike
generating
last
advantage.
time, Carlos actually has Harnessed Lightning, so he could try to take out the Copter before
Oh,
it
good
actually
point.
attacks,
Good
yeah.
point. Of course. Yeah, Immolating Glare does not afford him that, of course, but Harness Lightning does. All right. So it's not all bad. And, Carlos kind of clinging to that Spell Queller as a blocker for the other creatures, thinking, okay, if Makis just activates his Copter, I kill it. I take no damage for the turn. And then I can sweep everything else away like you described, Ian.
That's if everything goes according to plan.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Plans occasionally go awry.
So Maki's thinking long and hard about his play here. Looks like he's going to go for pre-combat Toolcraft Exemplar. The reason he's doing that is he can use that creature to crew the Smuggler's Copter and leave all of his other creatures to attack. But actually surprises me, goes with the Servo crewing the Copter instead. Oh, and the reason why is Reckless Bushwhacker being surged out. That gives everything haste, including the Toolcraft Exemplar that was just played. So this would be a huge attack. It's stemmed a little bit by Harness Lightning on the Smuggler's Copter.
Gee, still, it's not bad.
This is 3-2, right?
Yeah, that's fine.
Making sure that the trigger resolved on the Toolcraft Exemplar, as Makis was doing a lot of math prior to this attack step, and you can see why.
And speaking of math, I believe this is 11 damage coming in, so that's going to force a block from Spell Queller, which likely would want to block anyway.
Well, it looks like it's going to drop Carlos down to 4.
But now here comes Carlos's opportunity to play that Radiant Flames.
Boom! Radiant Flames.
Sweeps
Kiss
everything away.
all those creatures goodbye.
And now all Carlos has to do is fade a Reckless Bushwhacker for a turn or two here, and he might be able to stabilize despite his low life total.
Nothing from
Wow,
Makis.
what a huge, huge sequence there in that Makis Matsoukas simply draws a card and passes. Let's take a look at his turn, or his hand. He has a Gideon he was unable to play. 2
Yep.
Harness Lightning stranded in his hand with no targets, as well as a Stasis Snare.
He's going to use one of the Harness Lightnings to take down the Knight ally here. Of course, he's trying to clear the way for a potential attack from maybe a Reckless Bushwhacker or something like that.
3.
And Gideon coming down.
There is a land off the top for Makis, and it's untapped as well, so he will have his own Gideon if he'd like. This is close.
Yeah, I imagine we'll see Gideon and making a Knight token here. But
Right.
if Makis goes for this play, we know from Carlos's hand, taking a look here, there's a second copy of Radiant Flames. One option for Carlos is to cast that second Radiant Flames, sweep away the Knight token, activate his own Gideon, and take out Makis' Gideon.
Yeah, that seems like a perfectly reasonable play from here, especially given that Makis did nothing the prior turn with 3 mana. It's hard to imagine that he's holding a bunch of token-making cards that Radiant Flames is going to hit anyway. He would have cast something.
And Immolating Glare actually complements this plan perfectly because we can see 5 total mana, Radiant Flames takes out the Knight, Gideon takes out Gideon, and then Carlos is able to leave up Immolating Glare in case there's some kind of hasty threat like a Reckless Bushwhacker on the following turn.
Beautiful stuff here from Carlos Romao. Yeah, he's going to do it. Radiant Flames for 2, take that down, plus Gideon, rumble, win the Gideon fight. Matsoukas very purposefully untaps here. What does he find? He finds a Smuggler's Copter, but no crew. Passes a turn back. Deep breath from Carlos Romao. He knows how close this is. He finds a port town, which unfortunately for him enters a battlefield tap because he does have a Torrential Gearhulk in hand. He's going to have to sit on that Immolating Glare for now. Land go from Makis Matsoukas in his first Pro Tour. He finds himself in the semifinals, up against a 2-1 deficit.
Carlos
Former
taking a
world
look at his
champion.
graveyard there, almost, telegraphing the Torrential Gearhulk in a way.
It kind of was, though. I wonder if it even matters. I don't think Makis is going to be shocked that all of a sudden a Torrential Gearhulk were to appear once Carlos hits 6 mana. So he probably feels like, yeah, you know what's going on. I know what's going on. I'll just riffle through my library or my graveyard here.
Sure.
Okay, here's Pia Nalar now for Makis. That gives him a suitable crew for the Copter. By the way, that dice sitting there with a 4, that's nothing. That was Gideon's loyalty sort of lingering.
So Carlos actually allows the Smuggler's Copter to attack. I believe he had the option to play the Gearhulk and flashback Harness Lightning pre-combat. Chose not to do that. I think he wants to make use of his Immolating Glare here instead, perhaps.
Let's find out.
Although I have to say, I almost still like going with the Gearhulk here anyway. I wonder if Carlos maybe just kind of missed the window there or was thinking along one line and decided to go with another one. We'll see what he does here either way.
Makis also taking a quick look at Carlos's graveyard. You can see down goes the Smuggler's Copter.
Goes for the immolating glare. Given that we're already in combat and the Smuggler's Copter is already attacked, might as well flash back the immolating glare rather than the Harness Lightning, simply to be able to leave the Harness Lightning in your graveyard for a future Torrential Gearhulk.
2 cards?
Now, I am noticing, by the way, that Carlos has amassed quite a board state here. I mean, he's actually going to go for an emblem, it looks like, from Gideon.
Ah, interesting.
Ah, and you can see why.
Oh,
He's
here we
got a
go.
Radiant
This is
Flames
a Radiant
for
Flames for
2.
2, right? One of the awesome things about Radiant Flames, you can actually adjust its damage up and down to your choosing.
This way, Carlos gets to keep both of his Knight tokens. And Pia Nalara and her little friend are going to be sent packing. And how quickly does Carlos want to try to end this game? He has to think about cards like Reckless Bushwhacker, though he has a lot of information about what Makis did and didn't do over the last few turns to work with here as well, to start to piece together what kind of cards could be stuck in Makis' hands. Usually you think of removal spells.
Yeah, especially thinking back to that turn where Makis passed, I think he drew his 5th land, played it, and passed the turn with a couple cards in hand. So Carlos must be anticipating some removal spells, and so part of his calculations are, well, some of my creatures might die, so I can't plan out, say a 2-turn or 3-turn clock, relying on all my creatures surviving. But does get in there for 6 damage with Torrential Gearhulk.
Yeah, nice little attack there. And by the way, that was exactly what Makis had in his hand. His hand was Harness Lightning, Stasis Snare there. Only 2 mana available meant that he just had to use the Harness Lightning to take down the 3/3 Knight token. But when you're in that position, when you're in the aggressor's role and you're sitting there trying to work out how to not die, things have gone a little poorly for you. Does look like Makis picked up another copy of Gideon off the top of his library, though.
But now Makis in a bit of a pinch here. I'm sure he would love to get that Gideon onto the battlefield and start cranking out some Knights, but I think he needs to deal with Carlos's board first. And yeah, goes ahead and passes back the turn, I think planning to Stasis Snare that Torrential Gearhulk. Or potentially Gideon if it turns into a creature and attacks. So this has turned out to be quite the game here, Marshall.
This is absolutely a great game as we see Carlos Romao looking to try to end this thing. He is going to activate Gideon, and he is sending in everything, including a Wandering Fumarole. This is a lethal attack, though. Makis with his copy of Stasis Snare looking to prevent that. And that still does it. It's lethal, and Carlos Romao defeats Makis Matsoukas 3-1. Wow, what a beating there. This matchup did not look favorable for Makis, after having watched the match. He did get 1 game off of Carlos, but beyond that, those Radiant Flames did serious work for Romao, and he is our first finalist here at Pro Tour Kaladesh. We are in beautiful Hawaii, and we've got 1 seat taken, 1 seat open for our finalists. Now, to help get you set up, we're going to be talking about it, of course, at the news desk, and we'll be talking as well. But it's going to be Shota Yasuoka and Ben Hull who are going to be coming up next. But, reacting to that, Carlos Romao, the former world champion, is now into the finals. All right, so to help set you up for our second semifinal match, let's go back to the news desk and Rich Hagan.
Marshall, Ian, thank you so much for the call there on 4 excellent games of Magic between Carlos Romao and Makis Matsoukas. I've been joined by Hall of Famer Luis Scott Vargas. Luis, we're closing in. We've got a second semi-final and then a final. We've got 1 seed in the final field. Carlos Romao's there. Let's remind viewers at home of what we've seen here on our final day so far here at Pro Tour Kaladesh. Let's put up our revised top 8 bracket because things are a little different here. This is the first time we're trying this. You see that there were two stages to our quarterfinals. So if you were a 5 through 8 seed, you played the first round this morning. The winners of those advanced to stage 2, and now we've got as far as semi-finals. But right back at stage 1, we began with Carlos Romao, Jeskai control over Joey Manor, white-blue flash. Bit of an upset, that one.
Yeah, Carlos thought he was disadvantaged in the matchup, and it turned out he kind of cleaned house.
Yeah, he really did. So 3-1 to Carlos Romao. That put him through to stage 2. In the bottom half of the bracket, Ben Hull was playing in his first Pro Tour top 8 red-white vehicles, and indeed first Pro Tour altogether, against the 5-time top 8 competitor Li Shichan of Hong Kong. Both players with vehicles, not an awful lot to put between them. This was another 3-1 win though, Luis.
Yeah, we saw Ben kind of get ahead and strand Li with some unused smugglers copters in one of the games, and the extra removal that Ben had turned out to be the difference.
And that's what vehicles can do. Sometimes they do just sit there as a scrapyard, essentially. So that was Ben Hull through to stage 2, and then they would face the 3 and 4 seed. That was Pierre Dajon and Matt Nass, respectively. Those two, their reward for being the 3 and 4 seed was to advance automatically to the second stage. But the thing for Matt Nass, Luis, is that he looked at that bracket and went, Carlos Romao, don't want to play you. Joey Manor, don't want to play you either. But he had to play one of them.
Yeah, in either case, Matt was playing against a deck full of spell quellers and counter spells, and that's just not good news for the Team Aetherworks deck.
Right, so Team Aetherworks, which has been a fantastic deck this weekend and well worth sleeving up, or virtually sleeving up as the case may be, could not get the job done, and Carlos Romao advanced to the semi-finals. In the bottom half of the bracket, Pierre Dajon entered the fray with blue-red spells against red-white vehicles. Luis, what did you think would happen? What did happen?
I actually like the look of the blue-red spells deck against the vehicles-based aggro decks.
You always like the look of the blue-red spells deck. That's just historically true.
Even accounting for that, I actually think that Dynavolt Tower, Galvanic Bombardment, Harness Lightning, all these cards sounded great against red-white vehicles, but Ben Hull just kind of ran Pierre over. Those games didn't look particularly close.
No, it looked like Pierre, a lot of the time when you saw Dynavolt Tower being used, it was absolutely being used as, all right, I'm going to have to use up all of the energy I have managed to accumulate so far this game to get rid of one of your more than one threats. Not good at all. But again, another really fun deck to try out yourself. I dare say that blue-red spells will be part of the Pro Tour Gauntlet on Magic Online when that comes out. You can check that out from Wednesday next week. So Dajon gone, Hull advanced to the semi-final. We've just seen semi-final 1. That was between Makis Matsoukas, this Greek player who was in his very first Pro Tour. He paced the field all day on day 2 to become the first seed. He had red-white tokens, and he was up against Romao, who had already got rid of Mana and Nass. Could he do it against Matsoukas? Luis, what happened?
Turns out Radiant Flames said yes.
Radiant Flames said, in all the colours of the rainbow, yeah, you go away, little creatures. And Carlos Romao is your first finalist here at Pro Tour Kaladesh. Well, in just a few minutes, we're going to set things up for our second semi-final. Luis will be in the booth for that one, so you'll have his expert insight as we see the long-anticipated entrance into the top 8 fray of the Hall of Famer Showtime Shota Yasuoka of Japan with his Grixis control deck. More of that in a little bit, but as you know, Brian David Marshall has been out and about with Team East-West Bowl this week on the fabulous islands here in Hawaii, and we wanted to know, what did they make of the standard format coming into the Pro Tour? Just how close were they to knowing what this Pro Tour was going to look like? So here, one final time in the island paradise, here's BDM and East-West Bowl.
Okay, so I love crazy build-around me's. I love synergy nonsense, and so basically the entire Kaladesh spoiler jumped out at me. Like if I had to pick a few cards, I would say Aetherworks Marvel and Aetherflux Reservoir were the two that I was like, oh man, definitely gonna build a deck with these. It's gonna be bad, but maybe it's gonna be good, and then it's like I'm gonna have a lot of fun. And so those were like the big two that jumped out at me.
Okay, so yeah, cards to build around in Kaladesh. So yeah, I'm all about Key to the City. I think it's just absolutely stellar. It's like a Jace, the Vryn's Prodigy, that doesn't die to removal spells. So over the game, it's just going to improve your card quality so dramatically. And being able to cast, to use it in concert with Fiery Temper, you're literally just casting Lightning Bolt, make a clue in Standard, which is a very good card. The synergy is undeniable, and the fact that, you know, you're able to keep so many hands on the back of, oh, I have a key, so I know that even if my hand's a little slow, I'll be able to ensure that my draws over the course of the game are going to, on average, outstrip my opponents. So yeah, I think, you know, a major key to success is Key to the City.
So there were a lot of cards that I really loved in the format. I think it's pretty amazing what Wizards has done with this set. One of the most fun cards that I think I've experienced is Metalwork Colossus. It's just been like this gigantic thing that you can put into play really early and then chain them together with some Sanctum Ugins, and it's just been really great to experience giant monsters trampling onto the battlefield.
It's the Borings v. Malshevitz answer. It's the cards that interested me the most when the set was printed were the Fast Lands and Aether Hub. So, you know, Concealed Courtyard, Botanical Sanctum, those cards, just the lands. Because when you build decks in this format, you just have this really weird setup where, you know, you build like a green-white deck and your mana is completely different from building like a red blue deck. And, you know, how does that affect your decisions when you're building a Naya deck versus a Temur deck? You know, what can you then put into different decks because of that? And just how everything shakes out because of that, that was really what drew me in and what I started off testing with.
Honestly, it was actually Aether Hub. There are so many possibilities with Energy and Aether Hub that, you know, Magic is normally a game of like wide and broad possibilities, and just because you can use Energy to repurpose it into anything, you can play infinite colors, infinite energy cards, and Aether Hub fuels all of it.
Oh, Aetherworks Marble, hands down. I'm a big fan of solitaire decks. I know it's not like super interesting, but I've played Scapeshift and Volakut for so long now that you have to answer what I'm doing or you're gonna lose. So we're currently working on that, but that's the card I was most attracted to. And then I saw Skyship on the back end and I was like, oh, that's just a 6/5 flyer for 5 that kills Planeswalkers. So those were the two cards I was instantly attracted to, and they're completely different strategies. So it's allowed me to see both ends of the spectrum of going for a combo control deck or any deck with Skyship Sovereign at this point.
My pet card from the set is Dynavolt Tower. It's a card that is obviously very centralized in the mechanics of Kaladesh because Energy didn't exist before then. And something appeals to me about playing a virtually creatureless deck because that's where the card incentivizes. I think it's really difficult to make that card work properly, and I still have no idea if other people will figure out how to make it work in the Pro Tour.
The first card I actually saw was Oval Chase Daredevil. The reason because of this was I thought you could just like bring it back from your graveyard constantly by putting artifacts in play. If this is an artifact set, I mean, there's a bunch of ways of doing that. Much like Squee, old school ways we would do things, this would also trigger multiple times a turn compared to Squee. So if you compare things like Clues from Shadows of Innistrad and other artifacts that you have in this set, like Thopters or Servos or things of that nature, I was trying to see if I could like discard this card for value from in multiple times in a turn or throughout the game to create card advantage or just board advantage in general. Having a 4/2 blocks and attacks fairly well against mid-range or control strategies. So if I could just do that over and over again, it would work out. I think it might be too slow, but I'm pretty sure we found a bunch of other cards that go well with that in general.
At first, the Chandra Torch of Defiance popped up because it has four abilities, and it's -2 destroys Kalidas. But after playing with it, I think Smuggler's Copter is the card to play, and it's pretty good.
It's definitely Cathartic Reunion because I'm in the camp that if you have 8 of a certain effect, you can really start to abuse it. I was already looking for, okay, what can we do with Drownyard Temple? We're losing Magmatic Insight, but are there going to be any other ramps? There's no Nissa's Pilgrimage, and instantly thought, okay, for Reunion, slots in perfectly. I was trying Reunion with and Tormenting Voice with ramp as far as there's no goggles, but you can still go to Worldbreaker. I was trying it out with, even in like a mono red deck that had Bedlam Revelers, Avacyn's Judgment, I had a couple Harness the Storms in there. I was trying all sorts of things because I feel that something like that where there isn't exactly like a dredge in the format, but as far as getting to actually go through, you can see 20 cards in just a matter of a couple turns. There's got to be something there, particularly with nothing to punish graveyard, nothing to punish actually casting spells because counters aren't very popular. That really got my juices flowing.
I've been joined here at the desk by Ian Duke. Ian, I know that you saw on Twitter Owen Turtenwald posting his limited deck that I think had 10 creatures and it was red-blue and had 3 copies of Cathartic Reunion.
Yeah, I actually got to cover it. We were looking through the deck list in the booth, and Tim leaned over to me and he pointed at the 3 Cathartic Reunions. I'm like, wow, it's really unusual. And I was looking at the list, and I'm like, wow, he's got Dynavolt Tower. That must be why he's playing all these cool spells. Turned out he also had Sky Sovereign console flagship, and that was another reason why you want to play Cathartic Reunion, dig through your deck.
Let's go find that bad boy, absolutely. All right, so here we are gearing up for our second semi-final here at Pro Tour. Kaladesh, Rich and Ian with you, and marking your card for this second semi-final. Let's take a look at the bracket for you. Here's what we've already seen, and here is what is coming your way in the next couple of hours or so. We are down to just 2 matches remaining. We've just seen Carlos Romao of Brazil pile his way through Joey Manor in quarterfinal stage 1, Matt Nass in quarterfinal stage 2, Makis Matsoukas in semi-final stage 1. Remember, he is the reigning champion from Grand Prix Atlanta a week ago, plus a Team Grand Prix winner 6 weeks ago. This man basically can't lose. Or can he, when we find out who faces him in the final? We have seen Ben Hull also monster his way through this top 8. He defeated Li Shichan. He defeated Pierre Dajon. Now, Ian Duke, he has the sternest test yet, for sure, because he is up against Shota Yasuoka with his Grixis control deck. If you're Ben Hull, I don't care how many wins you've got to feel a little bit nervous about going up against Shota.
That's right. Shota, one of the most intimidating players to play against just on a pure skill level. He's an innovative deck builder. He's brought his own brew this time. No one knows it inside and out the way that Shota does. And, on top of that, Hall of Fame, pedigree coming in, just, so many things to be intimidated about, but we'll see. He's been holding his own so far, Ben Hull has.
He sure has. So let's take a look at Ben Hull for you, because he has to go up against Shota. Here he is. He's a 34-year-old from Canada playing in his first Pro Tour. Of course, therefore it is his first Pro Tour top 8. Thinks of himself as a limited player, so kind of chose a constructed deck off the shelf, if you like. Chris Van Meter's winning list from the SCG event a couple of weeks ago. And let's take a look at that red-white vehicles list for you. And for those of you not yet quite familiar with what red-white vehicles do, here's Ian to tell you.
So this is a deck that's sort of all new here from Kaladesh, centered around the vehicle mechanic and crewing up those vehicles. You've got plenty of dwarves in the deck as well, so Depala Pilot Exemplar kind of ties the whole package together in terms of boosting up your dwarves and your aggressive creatures, and also boosting your vehicles once you're able to crew them. So fundamentally, this is a red-white aggressive deck. It's leaning on synergies with vehicles. It's leaning on synergies with dwarves, a couple removal spells rounding it out, but relatively simple and straightforward deck.
Okay, now it is a well-known fact that everybody in Canada knows everybody else. And to prove it, across the stage, we've got Brian David Marshall with a Canadian, Doug Potter.
Thanks, Rich. I'm here with Doug Potter. Doug, you have actually it's interesting. I feel almost a little sad for Ben, because he's here very much by himself. He's off in a corner, texting with people at home about play testing stuff. But you can actually have a very distinct experience of Ben that is a stepping stone in his process to get here. I was curious about what the Edmonton RPTQ scene is like that produced Ben.
Yeah, so I come from Alberta, and Alberta is a place where our RPTQs are very small. Actually, our RPTQs have been 2 of the smallest RPTQs that have ever happened in the world. But the quality of players that are playing in these RPTQs are very high.
Yeah, you don't want to fly to this one.
it's incredibly. There's multiple GP winners, multiple GP top 8ers, and this is just like a field full of
just like Robert
players
Smith,
who have been to
Tyler
Blum. Brian Sue was in this RPTQ, who is on the Canadian national team. Marcel Zafra, who's here in his 10th Pro Tour. So it's a hard RPTQ. And
you were there. You were already qualified. You were rooting.
I was watching my friends on, watching Brian, watching Marcel, other friends, Ted, who qualified, and I was cheering everyone on. And there were a few people who traveled. And one of the guys who traveled was this guy, Ben, who was from Vancouver. And I was watching him play, and he was playing Collected Company, just, the stock, average, best deck theoretically. And he was playing it proficiently. And, we were rooting for our locals, but we just kind of watched him come in and just systematically just beat people that I was expecting to win the matches, maybe in matchups that seemed unfavorable, but he would just play it solidly, and he made it all the way through, and he ended up beating a good friend of mine, Brian Sue, in the clinching match, the deciding game 3. One big moment decided the whole thing, and he got here over Brian. Brian still gets to go to the WMCQ, but Ben's living the life in the top 4 now.
Let me ask you, I mean, obviously anytime you go to an event and you're rooting for your friend, it's almost as painful as when you lose yourself. And does seeing Ben here on the brink of a Pro Tour Finals, does that salve the wound a little bit?
There's definitely some Canadian pride, I'm not going to lie. When the announcement happened, we weren't really paying attention because we knew how all of our friends were doing. And when I heard Marshall say, and from Canada, I started looking around and making eyes with other Canadians like, whoa, we got a Canadian? Oh, I know that guy. That's that Ben guy. And my phone started going off because I have friends in Vancouver. They're like, yo, our boy, he's in the top 8. And there's this whole culture of Facebook. There's a lot of people back home from his store in Vancouver supporting him. And some are messaging me. I'm seeing some on the Facebook posts. And it's really cool to watch a Canadian do so well. And of course, we're rooting him on.
All right, well, he's got a steep task ahead of him.
Absolutely.
I know a player you enjoy watching. I'm going to let you get onto the sidelines and cheer him on, whoever you're cheering on there. I don't even know. But Doug Potter, thanks so much for coming to talk to us a little bit about Ben Hull.
Well, will it be vehicle night in Canada? We'll find out in just a little bit, but in his way is showtime. It's Shota Yasuoka of Japan. Let's take a look at his career resume. I'm not sure we can even fit it all on one screen because he is a Hall of Famer. 482 pro points, $250,000 in earnings, 4 Pro Tour top 8s, 20 Grand Prix top 8s. Player of the Year a decade ago. Just a ridiculously fabulous resume. Let's take a look at his list. It's Grixis Control. Ian, briefly, what's going on here?
So this is Shota's own creation. Rumor has it he came up with it the night before the tournament. In my mind, this is like the control deck that is built to beat the metagame here this weekend. He's got counter spells against Aetherworks Marvel. He's got sweepers against these small creature decks like the red-white aggressive decks. He's got plenty of cheap interaction in the form of red removal spells. One of the cool innovations in this deck is Thing in the Ice. He's got so many spells in the deck, he can really build around that creature, and it gives him tons of flexibility to transform the Thing in the Ice at instant speed, sending an Eldrazi back to his opponent's hand or sending back already crewed vehicles to the opponent's hand, and then using that to close out the game.
One thing you're going to have to watch out for, this is not a control deck that gets played slowly. Shota Yasuoka is fast. So you better buckle up, because it is time now for the second semi-final of Pro Tour Kaladesh.